One day closer to Suns Clippers. And on today's episode of Locked On Suns, we'll break down an update on one star player's injury status, a matchup between two other star players, and get into some awards talk as well. Let's go.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we're back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Brendon Kleen, a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 6 seasons, a writer at Suns.com, and the host of the Just Basketball Show wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for making Locked On Suns your first listen to start your Tuesday. Wherever you're finding us, all podcast platforms, including YouTube, we are free everywhere. We are in your feed every single Monday through Friday, so go ahead and hit follow or subscribe if you like what you're hearing, if you're finding us for the first time, whatever the case may be. You can also follow along at Locked On PHX Suns, get updates, new shows, everything else that way as well. Today's show, guys, is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA, all one word, for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed at Game Time. More from them later on in the show, but let's dive right in. Paul George gave us an update himself on his injury, the new era of media and everything else, players just telling us, which I guess is not a bad thing, but I have a clip. He basically said that he's feeling better. He's able to train now, and he was seen, I think, at the Suns Arena, or maybe the previous game, in a brace, but no longer in with crutches or a boot or anything like that, although it was a knee, so obviously boot wouldn't do much good. He's basically progressing toward on-court basketball activities, but isn't quite there yet. And I'll let PG tell you what he said for the video audience. For the audio audience, you'll hear me in just a second.
The leg is good, man. I'm making progress. You know how when we first was shooting, I was 2 crutches.
Yeah.
Then I went to 1 crutch.
To 1 crutch.
Come on now, I'm no crutch. I'm crutchless.
No crutch. Now you walking. You look good.
He can move it. He will be back out there sooner than he tell us.
Tell us, B.
I don't know how soon, but nah, man. I've been feeling better. I've been working my butt off. I've been grinding like literally every day. 6 days out of the week, I'm training. You know what I mean? I'm doing rehab. So I'm going to give it every chance I got, man. This is it's coming down to the wire.
Wait, what time in the morning doing therapy?
I'm up 9 o'clock, therapy at 10, getting out of there at like 1, 2 o'clock. Like I'm literally in there for like 3-4 hours.
And what they
training.
got you doing? I'm
doing, ISO stuff, kind of keep the quad, strong, stem stuff where they, massaging it. I'm getting flexion where, they bending it, trying to get, that motion and that strength back. I'm lifting, cardio, cold tub, hot tub, literally everything.
I can't wait to see you back on the court, P.
I know. I miss it.
All right, so you heard it there, a pretty in-depth answer. He promised us an update that is courtesy of the Playoff P podcast over at Buckets. But here's the deal. Obviously, this is a humongous domino, a humongous impact thing for this first-round series. It's part of why I think the Suns are happy to get this team in the first round, just by way of they're not at full strength, and why they're heavily, heavily favored in this series. To give some insight, and this show is going to be a little nerdy, so just it is what it is. We haven't really seen these teams. We have not seen these teams actually play one another at full strength. So there's only so much film and any of that I'm going to be able to reference. So you're going to have to hear some stats here, and they're really helpful to understand, especially this. This is pretty straightforward. The Clippers were basically 8 points better per 100 possessions with Paul George on the court this season. He helped their offense and their defense. But what's interesting within that is that their half-court defense was actually worse with Paul George and the other starters. Their half-court defense with their starting lineup was not very good. You look at the guys who had the biggest impact on-off stuff with the half-court defense, basically when the game slowed down, It's guys like Robert Covington, even Luke Kennard, Russell Westbrook, which, signals to me their defense did pick up the second half of the year after they got Russ. And that's kind of an interesting part of this, right? So Paul George, you would think, okay, that means the transition defense is better when he's out there. That would mean, the rebounding is better when he's out there. They're not allowing second chance points. Is he really controlling any of that? Or is some of that Zubats and just the overall more talented players being out there? It's hard to tell, right? But the Clippers' best high-volume lineup statistically this year, and what I see as maybe their best lineup, period, if it can be healthy this series, is Russ, PG, Kawhi, Morris, and Zubats. All right? And that lineup allowed fewer than 100 points per 100 possessions on defense as a five-man group. That's elite. I mean, I don't know. The best defense in the NBA, I can pull the number. I guarantee you it was nowhere close to that. So that is a rock-solid defensive lineup to put out there. The best lineup in the NBA allowed 111 points per 100 possessions. So you think they were significantly better than that with those five out there. Now, that doesn't hold up to what we think of Russell Westbrook as, right? And so it's going to be interesting. I think he's a real coin toss in this series. I don't think it's easy enough as just writing him off and saying Russ is going to just hurt this team and be a big negative and the Suns will destroy the Clippers anytime Westbrook is out there. I don't think it's going to be that easy. I think there's some things they can do to try to attack him, go at him, but I don't think that the statistics, none of it. He's been productive. He's been a good presence for them in terms of the on-off stats. Everything tells us that Westbrook's been pretty good, but he also seemed to bring, I don't want to say bring the best out of Paul George, but those two guys being on the lineup together, on the floor together in lineups, I think obviously is going to be best. That's kind of the first place I want to start. So those are the stats. That was the update prior. But what's the impact of this, right? I think Russ finds Paul George well off of screens. And I think that that's a really important key part of the Clippers offense. There's a lot of Clippers fans who complain that Paul George takes too many jumpers, settles for bad shots. A lot of them went in for him this year. But I get that, right? You know how big he is. You know how athletic he is. And so watching him settle for jumpers isn't always great. But when you have distributors, when you have ball handlers on the court, passers like Russ, all of that, it makes sense to bring George off of screens because it's pulling the defense out of the paint. It's preoccupying them, making them focus on something else. And Paul George, if he's making those shots, then okay. I don't think it's exactly a bad plan. And Russ is a guy who we know from their history with Oklahoma City together, and then this year when they played together, they have a little bit of synergy and chemistry there that I think benefits George, benefits Russ as well, and just brings the best out of the team. I think defensively is probably the bigger part, though, to me. Well, actually, one last thing on the offense. There's the other part of Kawhi Leonard's great season, which I'm going to break down in a moment, and you probably are aware of. He was very good this year, is that he was able to play off the ball a little bit more. Like, you look into the deeper of his statistics, he played a little bit more, coming off of screens, taking jumpers there, moving without the ball. That's not really something that we think of Kawhi as doing, but he was able to this year. And so Russ being there as a passer to get him in his spots, but also Paul George being a distributor. Paul George being a drive and kick type of guy can mean that Kawhi steps into a little bit of a different role, which he did this year. But on the defensive end, let's assume that George does come back at some point toward the end of this series. It would make sense for the Suns to treat this series like if you can get out to an early lead and maybe win it in 5, then you might not ever have to see Paul George. But let's assume he comes back. Let's say he comes back in game 5, just to pick something. I do think defense is the biggest impact here because I think PG is the ideal Booker defender, right? He's somebody that has the right combination of physicality and quickness to stay with Booker on and off the ball, to try to bump him off of his spots, to contest some of those really tough mid-range, fall-away, angular shots that Book is so good at taking. PG is 6'9". There's just really not a lot of players like him in the NBA, and that size is also going to be an advantage for the Clippers in this series, in my opinion. They are bigger than the Suns. Despite Durant being there, despite Ayton, Zubats is just as big as Ayton. Maybe they don't have somebody with Durant's physical traits because there isn't anybody, but I would say Leonard and George are pretty damn close. And then on top of that, they just have strength, physical, big, I don't even mean long, athletic guys. I mean, sturdy dudes. Gordon, Powell, Morris, Zubats, Russ, even, all those players are just strong, big, physical dudes, and Paul George adds to that, adds to an advantage that they already have, and so him being out there would obviously go a long way. It goes without saying, but that's some of the specific ways I think this would have an impact on the series if and when he's able to come back. We'll talk throughout the week about rotations and everything else. I want to get a little bit more on Cam Payne and Bismack Biyombo next time the Suns practice, more on Marcus Morris the next time the Clippers practice before I go into really detailed specifics on the rotation and things. But I want to dive into the Durant versus Leonard matchup in more detail here. I think that's what everybody's watching for. I think that's what everybody's excited for. I have some numbers. I have some observations about what those two will look like going head-to-head. We'll dive into that next. First, today's show, guys, brought to you by Game Time. I'm going to a concert right after I record this, and I ran into the absolute worst thing, which is they were available from the venue, but lo and behold, there's an extra fee and an extra $5 added onto the price because I bought them day of. Game Time cuts all of that out. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you with killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee. You can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun that you will have. They have flash deals. They make it very easy to navigate. And the best part to me is the images of seat views. I've been the type of person who has looked this up on a bunch of wonky, weird websites where random people upload their own picture and it's hard to find and you don't know if it's trustworthy. Game Time puts that right in the same app for you. Game Time is the fastest growing ticketing app in the country for a reason. Get images of your seat before you buy tickets in a matter of seconds, and tickets get sent directly to your phone, so you never have to dig through your email or go around trying to find the right app or anything else. It's right there for you. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download their app, the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA to get $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last-minute tickets, low price, guaranteed. Okay, so Durant versus Leonard. I think that's the main event in this series. I think it is the most exciting thing that you will be watching in this series. And in a lot of cases, it's going to be how these games close out. You know, these are teams that, yeah, they have their pet plays. I just talked about some of the off-ball screening stuff that Leonard and Paul George get freed up on. We know that Russell Westbrook can push the pace and they'll get some offense that way. The Suns have their pick and roll attack. They have some of their pet plays at the elbow and things. But really, when it comes down to it, these are both teams who, this is a strength. This is not me criticizing them. They are going to slow the game down, find the mismatch or, situation that they want to go at, and they are going to isolate. They are going to score that way, and you're probably not going to be able to do a whole lot about that. And these two guys are the best highlight examples of that, and they are going to be the guys who have the ball in their hands in those situations. Let's start with Kawhi. So a little bit about his season. He had the highest mid-range frequency and the highest mid-range efficiency of his career. So what we already knew was a strength of Leonard is that he's going to get into the mid-range area, rise up, and make contested mid-range shots like a robot. He's even better at that this season so far. He's also one of the highest volume and most impactful isolation scorers in the league. That should come as no surprise. He drove more than 15 drives per game. There's nothing, kind of my signature outside of that elbow jumper for Kawhi Leonard is the slow motion where he's almost just pushing guys out of the way with his own chest, driving to the basket, and then he hangs in midair and just goes off glass, draws fouls, all that stuff. 15 drives per game. And then he was a great passer. He has that gravity. So he's going to drive, he's going to isolate, he's going to get to that elbow, and the defense is going to suck. He's also, one of the other signature kind of visuals that I have of Kawhi Leonard is going up for that mid-range jumper and then passing it at the last second. He's very smart, and he's reading the floor even as he's jumping into the air. That's a very special ability of his as well. He had 27.4 potential assists per 100 passes. So you think about that. He was setting up guys for an opportunity to potentially score the ball, giving him an assist on over a quarter of his passes, right? So that's not possessions, that's not usage, it's when he passed, more than a quarter of those generated a potential score. That's pretty elite. That's very, very impressive. And so what are the Suns going to do about that, right? The Suns, I think, will have a Kogi guard him to start games, and I think either Durant or Craig could guard him to close games. that might catch you off guard a little bit that I said that name there, Torrey Craig. I feel like he is a player who we might see close games over Okogie in this series, and who we very well could see maybe even start games by the end of this series, depending on how much the Suns feel the need to adjust. If they win a lot of games and they make, they go up 2-0 or 3-1 or any of that, I don't think they're going to adjust. They don't want to show their hand. They don't want to panic. They don't want to do any of that. But if it gets to game 6, if it gets to game 7, I do think Craig is going to be somebody that they might go to even more. Brandon, on our Monday show, Brandon Duenas, my Monday co-host, brought up Ish Wainwright as a potential small ball center option. And this is all getting us to the same point, which again I said in that last segment as well. The size, the physicality, the bruising nature of a lot of these Clippers players is something the Suns will probably have to respond and adjust to. And I think Craig is somebody who will be able to do that. He's also just taller than Okogie, right? Okogie, despite having elite hops and pretty long arms and all that stuff, he's only 6'4". And so when you're talking about guarding Kawhi, who's 6'8" with a 7+ foot wingspan, or Paul George, who's even taller and longer than that, Okogie can only do so much. He's not going to be able to contest a lot of their shots. And so, there's other ways he can impact the game. I could see him guarding Russ effectively, maybe. I think, I'm not saying he won't have a role. I think battling on the glass will be important, all that stuff, transition. But Craig, to me, will be able to battle on the glass as well. We know that's a strength of his, and be able to match size, inch for inch, a little bit better, foot for foot, just being the same size as the Clippers players who are all very big. That's where I think that this will break down. That's how I feel like Kawhi will maybe make the Suns adjust. And I do think, it's just going to come down to stopping him in isolation situations. That's what he makes the game into, and it's a winning strategy a lot of the time. He has 2 rings to show for that, and, multiple All-Star appearances and all that stuff. The Clippers gave up a lot to get those guys for a reason. Kevin Durant, most efficient season of his career, or one of. At this point, it's arguable. He's had so many different iterations of his career, but it's the best shooting percentage that he's ever had, best 2-point percentage that he's ever had, and the best free throw percentage. So maybe it's not super arguable, but that's where he was. I think this is kind of interesting. He's also been used as a spacer and spot-up shooter on a lot of Suns sets, right? And so I would imagine that we will see a lot of Kawhi on Durant, especially late in these games, or if Durant gets hot. But what's kind of interesting about how the Suns have used him, especially since he came back from the ankle injury the past 5 games that he played, is he was a spacer and spot-up guy, right? And so, again, to reiterate that, if Kawhi's guarding him, it also serves to take Kawhi out of the play. And so it does sort of make the Clippers have to think things through. They also like to switch when there's screens. But if you kind of simplify things and you have Durant in just that left corner as a kick-out release valve, then there's not going to be a lot of switching happening. So maybe, Kawhi being out there, you take some of the wins, you take some of the losses of that, but you're basically taking him out of the play, and the Suns can do a lot of damage without Durant even being involved. And then maybe you do try to get Durant switched away from Kawhi, or you do try to get him in motion so that Kawhi has to do a little bit more. So I'll be interested to see if they actually put Kawhi on him, 90% of the time, or if they mix things up. Kawhi guarded lower usage players almost as often as top usage players this season. Another part of why Paul George is so important, because I do think he allows you to get to some defensive matchups that are a little bit better for yourself. George would be the Booker defender, as I talked about, and then Kawhi could be on Durant, and then that brings us to Morris. If Marcus Morris is able to play, I think he will guard Durant as the primary matchup, at least, game 1, let's just say, before any of the adjustments start to come into play. I think you would see Morris guarding Durant. I think you would see Kawhi guarding Booker. And then I think you would see, whatever from there. Maybe, I don't know if they start Eric Gordon. Maybe he guards Chris Paul. Maybe Russ then is just put onto Okogie. You want your best defenders on your best players, but you also want the size to match up and everything else. They switch a lot, so maybe some of it's a little bit irrelevant, but that's something I'm watching. Do they treat Durant as a threat? Are they okay putting their best defender away from the action if the Suns do put Durant in those spots? And then what do they do with Durant when he is isolating, when he is just posting up, and you have to just stop that, and that's probably where guys like Kawhi come in. Speaking of Kevin Durant, the Locked On Podcast Network, the NBA channel at least, did voting on All-NBA, and Kevin Durant got in, and it got me thinking, could he actually get into All-NBA this season? Will he actually be one of the winners of that award? We'll talk about that next. First, today's show, folks, brought to you by PrizePicks. Here's the deal. PrizePicks came in. They fixed daily fantasy sports. I was never a big lover of daily fantasy because you were playing against somebody who did it for a living, you felt like, or a pool or a league, and you just felt like it was a losing game. It was not worth your time, but PrizePicks fixed it. PrizePicks made it all work out. PrizePicks made it so that you're not playing against humans or pools or leagues. It's just you versus the projection. And honestly, that's a lot better. You just pick 2 to 6 players, and if they will go more or less than their PrizePicks projection, and you can win up to 25 times your money on any entry. You're not competing against other people, just you versus those projections. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. PrizePicks offers safe and fast withdrawals, and they are currently operational in over 30 states as well as Canada. Download the PrizePicks app now or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play this awesome daily fantasy sports game. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code LOCKEDON. That means if you deposit $100, PrizePicks will match that right back into your account with an extra $100 right there for you. Don't forget to enter the promo code LOCKEDON at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. All right, so let's close things out. Kevin Durant, All-NBA. I'll read it to you really quickly here. The Locked On NBA guys, all the people who host shows like this for all the NBA teams, did a big vote, and we basically just picked our awards picks. We just decided who do we think the MVP of the NBA is, who do we think the defensive player of the year is, all that stuff. And Durant got second team All-NBA, so let me just read it to you. First team was Shea, Luka, Giannis, Tatum, and Embiid. Second team was Mitchell, Curry, Durant, Jaylen Brown, and Nikola Jokic. Durant actually got one first-team vote, which, okay, don't think he's going to get many of those in the real vote, but maybe I'm wrong. I'll talk about it in a second. Third team, Lillard, Fox, Butler, LeBron, and Sabonis. I don't think we saw many of the extra votes. They didn't give us the others receiving votes for All-NBA because there were probably just a ton. But to give you some perspective, Durant actually finished third among forwards. So he was above Jaylen Brown, above Jimmy Butler, above LeBron James. I'm really surprised by this. And the main reason is games played. 47 was where Durant finished. Also the trade. I don't think you see a lot of players get traded and still get rewarded in some of these categories. He only played 1,600 minutes, which was the third lowest number of his career. One was the year he came back from the Achilles. One was the year where he had that foot injury and missed a good portion of the season. And so 47 games just isn't a lot. People have already been going back and forth on Booker, for instance, or Steph Curry, guys who played more than 50 games. Even LeBron and AD are in that category. And so I just have a hard time imagining that Durant will get up there, but his numbers deserve it. I mean, really, like if he had played 10 more games, I wouldn't even be wondering. I mean, there still would be the trade part, but his numbers are just out of this world. 29.1 points per game. Got to the free throw line more than he has since he was in Oklahoma City. Like not even the last Oklahoma City year, but like the middle of his prime. He got to the free throw line that often this season. He made 62% of his twos, which is out of this world. Rebounding, assists, right in line with career norms. And then he was up back over 1 block per game, which he hadn't had since the first couple of Golden State seasons. So he's everything you would want. I think his record was 34-13 in those 47 games. He obviously did not lose as a member of the Suns. I mean, I've said this before on this show. I've said it before in the past, but if Durant had stayed with the Nets, I know Suns fans don't want to imagine that world, but let's just do it because it's part of what I'm trying to say here. If he did that, if he had stayed with Brooklyn, and honestly even just come back from the knee injury, let's say, right after the trade deadline, and he had played after the All-Star break, and he had played the remainder of those 22 games, that puts him at 61. Maybe that's not enough, but he was on an MVP course. He really, truly was. And maybe he pushes that injury return a little bit quicker because of the trade not happening and the patience not needing to be there and a little more urgency with Brooklyn. Maybe he gets, 23 games and he gets to, that would put him at 70 games played. That would put him at 62 games played. I could see it. I really think he would have been in the MVP consideration. He would have been somebody getting 4th, 5th place votes, maybe 3rd place votes, and whatever. This is the type of season that he had. The minute he has been on the court this year, his teams have won at an elite level, and his production it stacks up with anybody. It's just a matter of he didn't play as much. For the record, in case you're interested, I just wanted to close out with my All-NBA teams because I think it's interesting, and I did put Booker. I don't have a vote, you know that, but it's fun. My first team was Curry. My first team had Donovan Mitchell. My first team had Tatum and Giannis and Embiid. My second team was Shea, Luka, Jaylen Brown, Jimmy Butler, and Nikola Jokic. And then my third team, which again did have Booker on it, was Drew Holiday, Devin Booker, LeBron James, Julius Randle, and Domantas Sabonis. So I don't think if I did have a vote, or even just for the fun of it. I did talk about this on the Just Basketball show, which you can totally check out. We did a big breakdown of awards. I gave you my case for a lot of this stuff. I actually am really proud of, I put a lot of work into it. So if you do want to check that out, please do. We're trying to grow that audience. I don't plug it a lot because I don't want to bother you guys, but please do that because it's a good show. Playoff first impressions, and awards. But that's what I went with. And I don't think Durant gets there because of the minutes, but I do think LeBron does. I do genuinely think Booker does. So it's not even that I'm a big, have a high threshold for this stuff. I think if you cross over like 50, 52 games, you're gonna get a lot of consideration for me. 47, it's barely over half the season. It's just not quite there. But that'll wrap us up, guys. I just wanted to give you a little bit there. I don't think Durant will make the All-NBA team. I just told you I wouldn't give it to him, but I could be wrong, and this was a little bit of a reality check for me of like, wait a second, have I been overlooking this? Because this was all random hosts. This is people who cover the Magic, people who cover the Celtics, people who cover the Blazers. Like, it was all of our hosts, and they came away feeling like Durant was worthy. We'll see. Back tomorrow with hopefully more news. Maybe once these teams do practice, we shall see more breakdown of this series, rotations, adjustments, the coaching battle, all that stuff, and Aaron Edwards coming up to close out the week later on Friday. So hit follow or subscribe for all of that content in your feed every Monday through Friday, as well as game recaps once this series gets kicked off. That'll be the schedule. That'll be the routine. There's how to get it. In the meantime, check out Locked On NBA. Get your fill of the rest of the association. That show's available on all podcast platforms as well. And I will catch you guys tomorrow.